Are there dragons in the Bible? The answer may surprise you. Hey everyone, I'm Colin, the resident nerd and Bible scholar here at the Bible Uncut and Unfiltered. And this week we are talking about dragons in the Bible. This conversation is going to be pretty similar to a short that we did several months ago about unicorns in the Bible. So the first part of this I have to address is the version of the Bible that you use is probably going to change the answer here. Because if you're using an older version like the King James or maybe Young's literal translation, you will probably find the word dragon in your English Bible. But like we've talked about plenty of times before here, anytime you read the Bible in English, you are reading a translation. So just because there is an English word there does not necessarily mean that is always the best representation of the Hebrew, Greek, or Aramaic behind it. Most English translations are very reliable, but they can make mistakes sometimes. And especially as time goes on and we learn more about what words meant in the ancient world, sometimes we update our understanding of how to translate specific words. So there are technically three words in the Bible that sometimes get translated dragon. In Hebrew, it is going to be tan and tanin, so that'll be transliterated as T-A-N and T-A-N-I-N in English. And then in Greek, it will be drakon, D-R-A-K-O-N would be how we transliterate that. And you'll get a wide variety of definitions of those words if you look them up in a Bible dictionary, or if you check out multiple versions. So, like I said, some older versions will have dragon, and then sometimes, especially for tan, you'll get jackal sometimes, or some sort of wild dog. For tanin, you might get monster, sea serpent, even crocodile. And then the Greek term drakon, that actually only shows up in Revelation. And since Revelation has a lot of very strange, symbolic, mythological imagery, most English translations will stick with dragon there. So what's going on? What are these strange creatures in the Bible that are so hard to define? Well, it is always possible that there were species of animals in the ancient world that don't exist today. We also have to realize that the Bible frequently draws on mythological imagery from the cultures around ancient Israel to co-opt their mythologies and make a point about Israelite mythology. So the words tan and tanim, they refer to a sea serpent, a giant, strange sea creature of some form. And in fact, it's actually the word that shows up in Genesis 1:21 when God is said to have created, and again, you'll get different things depending on your translation, but if you're using the King James, it'll say great whales. That's actually the word tanin. It means sea serpent. God created massive sea creatures is what it's referring to. So not necessarily anything so specific or grounded as a whale or even a crocodile, but you are meant to think of large mythological sea serpents. We have to remember that the Bible is an ancient document from the ancient world before they had explored the entirety of the world around them. So you have to think about really old maps, like when they didn't know what was in a certain area and they just kind of draw a sea serpent there to take up space on the map. That's kind of the idea of what's going on. And when you get to Revelation and you have the influence of Greek mythology and hundreds of years of Israelite mythology now, I think it makes perfect sense to keep drakon, meaning dragon. I don't think there's any reason that we need to try to ground that in some specific creature that we can find in the animal kingdom today. So what are these weird mythological creatures doing in our Bibles? Are we supposed to believe that dragons actually existed, or is there something more going on? Well, this is where it helps to know some ancient Near Eastern mythology, because large sea serpents were often a part of creation accounts in the ancient Near East. There are creatures like Lotan, Tiamat, Tehom that show up in some of these ancient Near Eastern mythologies and are often battling with the gods or other large creatures as the world as we know it is being created. We even have this in scripture itself with Leviathan. There's even a psalm in our Bibles that draws on the Mesopotamian myth of Tiamat being ripped apart during creation, and the psalmist uses the imagery of Leviathan being ripped apart by God to describe the creation account. It's a very different way of explaining creation than what we find in Genesis 1 and 2. This really helps us understand the role of dragons in the Bible. I think it is best to translate tanin, and drakon as sea serpents or dragons. Not to say that those creatures actually once existed, but to respect how the Bible used the mythology of the cultures around ancient Israel and drew on them to explain its own mythology. It used Leviathan and Tiamat and Lotan and other sea serpent-like dragon-esque creatures to symbolize the chaos of the world that God speaks order into. And unlike many of those ancient Near Eastern myths, there was no massive battle between God and these creatures, but rather the God of the Bible just spoke the order of creation into existence. So yeah, there kind of are dragons in the Bible, and they serve a very significant purpose to show us that our God is more powerful than the chaotic forces at work in this world, and that our role as followers of God is much like what Adam and Eve had in the garden, to spread the order of God's creation into a chaotic world. And that's a really cool message. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to check out our podcast series on Genesis 1 through 6 and 7 through 11, where we get into a lot more detail about these sorts of things.